Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be cracking open James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Oh, yeah.
You know all about this. You've sent over excerpts from the book. It's all about how tiny changes can lead to huge results. We're going to pull out the most useful bits for you.
Sounds good. I mean, it is fascinating, how much of what we do each day is basically on autopilot.
It really is.
Atomic Habits not only explains how habits work, but it also gives like a practical framework
Yeah.
for building good ones and breaking bad ones.
Absolutely. And we're going to be diving into the science behind habits today and in the next couple parts. We're also going to explore some really practical tips that you can use right away. We'll even unpack a story about how simply upgrading soap in a community drastically impacted public health.
Wow.
But first, I think it's worth touching on James Clear's own journey. His personal story really shaped his work.
Yeah, you're right. He had a serious baseball injury in high school.
Oh, wow.
It was so bad that he was airlifted to the hospital, couldn't breathe on his own,
Oh, my.
and his mom had to hold his hand while he was unconscious during the flight.
Wow. That's a really powerful image. That must have been such a difficult experience.
It was. It was a long road to recovery for him. And he had to rely on small, consistent actions, to rebuild his strength in his life, really. That experience is really what sparked his fascination
Yeah.
with the power of tiny changes.
That makes a lot of sense. Sounds like that experience really set the stage for his work.
So let's zoom out a bit. If someone was totally new to this idea of atomic habits, what would be like the key takeaway for them?
Hmm. I'd say the key takeaway is this idea that tiny improvements, even just getting 1% better each day,
Okay,
can accumulate over time and create incredible results.
that makes sense.
It's like this idea of marginal gains that Claire talks about.
Yeah.
He uses the example of the British cycling team. They went from being pretty average to dominating the sport
Oh, wow.
by focusing on getting just 1% better in every single area,
Really?
from their equipment to their sleep schedules.
Yeah.
So they weren't making many radical changes, just tiny tweaks over time.
Exactly. And the impact was huge. If you think about it, if you improve something by just 1% each day for a year, you end up 37 times better by the end of that year.
Whoa, that's kind of mind-blowing. It really highlights the power of consistency. What I'm getting from this is that it's not about these big dramatic changes, but rather making small, sustainable improvements over time.
Yes. And Clear emphasizes this by suggesting that we focus on systems rather than goals. It's about creating a framework for consistent action rather than just focusing on a specific outcome.
That's interesting. So instead of setting a goal like run a marathon, you'd focus on building a system that would support running regularly.
Precisely. It's about building habits and routines that automatically move you towards your desired outcome. It's also interesting how Clear points out that focusing solely on goals can sometimes actually be a problem.
Really?
Yeah, it can make you feel like you're constantly striving for something that's just out of reach. And once you hit the goal, you might lose motivation or even fall back into old habits.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. So how does Clear suggest we approach this idea of systems over goals?
Okay, so he breaks this idea down into three levels: outcomes, processes, and identity.
Okay.
The outcome is the goal, the process is the system you build, but the most fundamental level is identity. He argues that real change happens when you shift your identity, not just your actions, but who you believe you are.
So it's not just about doing the things, it's about becoming the type of person who does those things.
Exactly. So let's say you want to start meditating every day.
Okay.
Instead of just focusing on meditating for 10 minutes each morning, you'd focus on becoming a mindful person. You'd start to see yourself as someone who prioritizes mindfulness and integrates it into their daily life.
I see. So it becomes less about checking a box and more about a fundamental shift in how you see yourself.
Right.
That's really powerful. It seems like understanding this idea of identity is key to lasting change.
Absolutely. It's a completely different approach to building habits. It's less about willpower and more about aligning your actions with your beliefs about yourself.
That's fascinating.
Hmm.
So we've talked about Clear's personal story. We've talked about the idea of small improvements compounding over time. We've talked about the importance of focusing on systems and identity.
Hmm.
What I'm really curious about now is the how. How do we actually put these ideas into action?
Right.
How do we start building better habits?
That's where Clear's 4 laws of behavior change come in.
Yeah.
It's a practical framework for making good habits easier to adopt and bad habits harder to maintain.
Okay, I'm definitely ready to hear more about these 4 laws.
Mhm.
It sounds like this is where things get really practical and applicable to our everyday lives.
Welcome back to your deep dive into Atomic Habits. In the last part, we talked about James Clear's own journey, the incredible power of making small changes over time, and how focusing on your systems and identity can be more effective than chasing after specific goals. Now let's explore those 4 laws of behavior change that you mentioned.
Yes, I am all ears. Give me all the juicy details about these laws.
All right. The first law is all about making the cues for your good habits obvious and the cues for your bad habits invisible.
Okay, so it's like setting up your environment to make good choices easier and bad choices harder.
Yeah,
What I'm picturing is like if I leave a bag of chips on the counter, I'm way more likely to mindlessly grab a handful.
right.
But if I keep a bowl of fruit on the table,
hmm
I'm more likely to snack on that instead.
That's a great example. Clear calls this environment design. He talked about how our surroundings are constantly sending us signals that trigger certain habits, often without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
So if you want to build better habits, you need to become aware of these cues and then manipulate your environment to make those cues work for you, not against you.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's like we're playing a game against our own brains, and we need to stack the deck in our favor.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even small changes like moving that bowl of fruit to a more prominent spot can make a big difference.
Wow. Yeah. So making it obvious is the first law. What's the second?
Okay, the second law is make it attractive. This one taps into how our brains are wired to seek out pleasure and reward.
Uh-huh.
You know how when you do something enjoyable, your brain releases dopamine, that feel-good chemical?
Yeah, dopamine's basically our brain's reward system, right?
Right. And dopamine plays a huge role in habit formation.
Okay.
We're more likely to repeat behaviors that trigger that dopamine release. So the key here is to find ways to make those good habits more appealing to your brain.
I see what you mean. Sometimes the things we need to do, like eating healthy or exercising, aren't always the things we want to do. So how do we bridge that gap and make those habits more appealing?
Clear has a couple of really interesting strategies for this. One is called temptation bundling. It's basically pairing an action you want to do with an action you need to do.
Oh, I've heard of this. It's like letting yourself watch your favorite show only when you're on the treadmill.
Exactly. You're linking a pleasurable activity with a necessary one, making the whole experience more enjoyable.
That's a great tip. What other strategies does Clear suggest?
Another powerful strategy is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the norm.
So surrounding yourself with people who are already doing the things you want to do.
Precisely. Humans are social creatures, and we tend to mirror the behaviors of those around us. If you want to make a habit stick, find a group of people who share your goals and values. That social support and accountability can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you've got to make it obvious and make it attractive. What about the third law?
Okay, the third law is all about reducing friction. It's make it easy.
Okay.
The basic idea here is that the easier a habit is to do, the more likely you are to actually do it.
Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
We're all about taking the path of least resistance, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Clear highlights how even tiny amounts of friction can make a big difference. He gives this example of a study where they simply rearranged the furniture in a cafeteria. And they found that it significantly influenced what people chose to eat.
Wow, really? Just by changing the layout?
Yep. They made the healthier options more visible and easier to reach, and people naturally gravitated towards them. It goes to show that our environment has a huge impact on our choices, often without us even realizing it.
It's amazing how much of our behavior is influenced by these subtle cues in our environment.
It really is.
So I guess the takeaway here is that if we want to make good habits easier, we need to reduce the friction as much as possible.
Exactly. It's about removing any barriers that stand in your way. For example, if you want to start working out in the morning, lay out your clothes the night before so you're not scrambling to find them when you're half asleep.
Okay, that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy.
Right.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yes.
What's the final law?
Okay, the fourth and final law is make it satisfying. This one's all about ensuring your good habits have some sort of immediate reward associated with them.
Uh-huh. This is where we celebrate those small wins, right?
Exactly. Our brains are wired to seek out pleasure and avoid pain. Yes.
So if we want to make a habit stick, we need to make it feel good. It doesn't have to be a huge reward, but something that gives you a sense of satisfaction and reinforces the behavior.
I think this is a key piece of the puzzle that a lot of people miss. They get so focused on the long-term benefits of a habit that they forget about the importance of those short-term rewards.
Yes. We need those little bursts of dopamine to keep us motivated, especially in the early stages of building a habit.
So, for example, if I'm trying to build a habit of writing every day, I could reward myself with a cup of my favorite tea after I finish my writing session.
Exactly. Or you could track your progress in a journal and visually see how much you're accomplishing. The key is to find something that genuinely feels rewarding to you.
That makes sense. So, on the flip side, should we be making bad habits less satisfying?
That's a great point. Clear talks about the importance of adding some kind of immediate consequence to bad habits to make them less appealing.
So, like, if I'm trying to break a habit of mindless scrolling on my phone.
I could set app limits or even delete those tempting apps altogether.
Exactly. Or you could make a commitment to donate a certain amount of money to a cause you don't support every time you slip up. That way, there's a real cost associated with the bad habit.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these 4 laws can be applied to pretty much any habit. It's a really simple but powerful framework.
Hmm.
So we've got make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. Are we forgetting anything? I know you mentioned something earlier about a soap story.
Oh, yes. That story perfectly illustrates the fourth law: make it satisfying. Stephen Luby, a public health worker, was trying to improve sanitation in Karachi, Pakistan. One of the biggest challenges was getting people to wash their hands regularly, especially before meals.
Right.
They knew it was important, but they just weren't doing it consistently.
It's like we know we should do certain things, but knowledge doesn't always translate to action.
Hmm.
So how did Luby address this hand-washing challenge?
He teamed up with Procter & Gamble to provide the community with Safeguard soap. But here's the key. Safeguard wasn't just any soap.
Okay.
It lathered well, it had a pleasant scent, and it made the whole hand-washing experience more enjoyable.
So they basically made hand-washing more satisfying.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. What happened?
The results were incredible. Diarrhea rates in the community plummeted by a whopping 52%.
Wow. Just from switching to a nicer soap.
Yes.
That's amazing. What I'm taking away from this is that we often underestimate the power of small changes, especially when it comes to our habits. Making something even slightly more enjoyable can dramatically increase our willingness to do it.
Exactly. It's a great reminder that we don't always need to rely on willpower or motivation. Sometimes a little bit of clever design and a focus on positive reinforcement can go a long way.
Okay, so we've covered the 4 laws of behavior change. What else does Clear have to say about taking our habits to the next level?
Well, one interesting concept he discusses is the Goldilocks rule. It's the idea of finding the sweet spot of just manageable difficulty. If a task is too easy, you get bored.
Uh-huh.
If it's too hard, you get discouraged and give up.
That makes sense. It's like when you're learning a new skill. If it's too easy, it's not engaging. But if it's so hard that you feel like you're constantly failing, you're likely to lose motivation. So
Yeah.
how do you find that just right level of challenge?
Clear suggests that you want to be working on tasks that are just slightly outside of your comfort zone,
Okay.
challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that you feel overwhelmed.
I like that. It's about pushing yourself just enough to keep growing without getting discouraged.
Mm.
Does Clear offer any examples of this Goldilocks rule in action?
He talks about the comedian Steve Martin, who spent years honing his craft by performing stand-up comedy for hours on end, even when the jokes weren't landing. He was always pushing himself to improve, but he was also careful not to take on too much too soon.
That's a great reminder that mastery takes time and consistent effort. You can't expect to become a world-class comedian or a master of anything overnight.
Right.
It's about showing up consistently and embracing those small steps of progress.
Exactly. And speaking of consistency, another key concept Clear emphasizes is the importance of reflection and review.
So, taking the time to step back and analyze our habits, seeing what's working and what's not.
Yes. He suggests that we need to be our own coaches, constantly evaluating our performance and making adjustments as needed.
It's like we're scientists running experiments on ourselves, gathering data and refining our approach based on what we learn. Does Clear offer any real-world examples of this reflection process in action?
He talks about the Los Angeles Lakers basketball. Right. It was about those less tangible qualities like hustle, teamwork, and mental toughness, the things that often make the difference between a good team and a great team.
It's interesting how this concept can be applied to any area of life, not just sports.
Yeah.
Whether you're trying to build a business, write a book, or improve your relationships, it's about showing up consistently and giving your best effort day in and day out.
Absolutely. It's about embracing that growth mindset and focusing on continuous improvement.
This is all so helpful. So we've got the Goldilocks rule, reflection and review, and this idea of giving our best effort. Are there any other key takeaways we should be aware of?
Yes. There's one more important concept that we haven't touched on yet. It's the idea of maintaining a sense of identity, even as your roles and circumstances in life change.
That's an interesting one. What does clear mean by that?
Well, let's say you've built your identity around being a marathon runner, but then you get injured and you can't run anymore. That can be a devastating blow to your sense of self.
Yeah, I can imagine it's like a part of you is missing.
Exactly. So Clear suggests that we need to find ways to maintain a sense of continuity in our identity, even as our external circumstances change. Instead of defining yourself solely as a marathon runner, you might shift to seeing yourself as someone who is dedicated to physical fitness or who embraces challenges.
That's a great point. It's about finding those core values and beliefs that underpin your identity, rather than tying your sense of self to specific roles or achievements.
Yeah.
It's about building an identity that is flexible and adaptable, rather than rigid and fragile.
Exactly. It's about creating an identity that can evolve with you as you grow and change.
This is all so insightful. What I'm really appreciating about Claire's approach is that it's not just about checking boxes or following a set of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the deeper psychological and even philosophical principles that drive our behavior.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Atomic Habits such a powerful and enduring book. It's not just a quick fix or a fad diet for your habits.
Yeah,
It's a framework for lifelong growth and transformation.
I couldn't agree more. It's about making small, consistent changes that compound over time, ultimately leading to remarkable results.
Precisely. And the beauty of it is that anyone can do it, regardless of their starting point or their natural abilities.
That's so encouraging. So we've got the Goldilocks rule, reflection and review, giving our best effort, and the importance of maintaining a flexible sense of identity. Before we move on, there's one last question that's been swirling in my mind.
Okay, I'm listening.
Clear talks about happiness being the absence of desire. Can you unpack that a bit? At first glance, it seems a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I usually think of happiness as a feeling of joy or contentment, not the absence of something.
That's a great question, and it's definitely one that makes you think. I think what Clear is getting at is that true happiness isn't about constantly chasing after external things or achievements. It's not about acquiring more and more stuff or reaching some distant goal.
It's not about getting what you want, but about being content with what you have.
In a way, yes. But I think it goes deeper than that. Remember those dopamine-driven feedback loops we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Our brains are wired to seek out pleasure, and dopamine is the chemical that reinforces those pleasurable experiences.
Right. That's how our brains learn to repeat behaviors that feel good.
Exactly. So when Clear talks about happiness being the absence of desire, he's suggesting that true happiness comes from a state of inner peace and contentment, where we're not constantly craving or striving for something more.
So it's about finding a sense of balance where we can appreciate the good things in our lives without always feeling like we need more.
Precisely. It's about cultivating gratitude and acceptance rather than always focusing on what's missing.
That's a beautiful concept.
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you think about it in the context of what we've been discussing. When we focus on systems and identity rather than solely on outcomes, we're less likely to get caught up in those endless cycles of desire and dissatisfaction.
Absolutely. When we shift our focus from external achievements to internal fulfillment, we create space for a deeper sense of joy and contentment to emerge.
This is all starting to click for me now. It's like a whole new way of looking at happiness and fulfillment.
And it's a perspective that can be incredibly liberating. When we release the need to constantly chase after things, we free ourselves to experience a more profound sense of joy and peace.
This has been an incredible conversation. I'm already feeling inspired to apply these ideas to my own life. I'm curious, though, what does Clear suggest we do when those inevitable setbacks happen? It's easy to get discouraged when you slip up or fall off track.
That's a great question. And it's something we all deal with. Claire offers some really helpful advice for navigating those setbacks. He emphasizes that it's not about being perfect, but about making progress. There will be days when you don't stick to your habits perfectly, and that's okay. The important thing is to get back on track as quickly as possible. He has a saying, never miss twice.
I love that. It takes the pressure off of needing to be perfect and allows for those inevitable slip-ups. It's about getting back on the horse, so to speak, rather than beating yourself up over a mistake.
Exactly. It's about having self-compassion and recognizing that setbacks are a natural part of the process. The key is to learn from those setbacks and use them as an opportunity to refine your approach.
This is all so incredibly helpful. I'm feeling so much more equipped to tackle my habits and build a life that's truly aligned with my values and aspirations.
That's fantastic. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
I love that reminder. It takes the pressure off and allows us to enjoy the process of growth and change.
And speaking of the process, there's one more crucial concept from Atomic Habits that I think is worth highlighting. It's the idea of stacking your habits.
Okay, what's habit stacking all about?
It's about leveraging the power of existing habits to build new ones. You basically link a new habit to an existing one, creating a chain reaction of positive behavior.
So for example, if I already have a habit of making my bed every morning, I could stack a new habit of doing 5 minutes of stretching right after I make the bed.
Exactly. You're using the momentum of an existing habit to create a new one.
That's such a clever strategy. It makes building new habits seem much less daunting.
It really does. And what's amazing is that as you stack more and more habits, you create this powerful upward spiral of positive change.
I'm loving this idea. So we've got the 4 laws of behavior change, the Goldilocks rule, reflection and review, maintaining a flexible identity, never missing twice, and now habit stacking. I feel like we've uncovered a treasure trove of wisdom from Atomic Habits.
We have. And what's so inspiring about all of this is that anyone can do it. You don't need any special skills or talents to build better habits.
That's so empowering. It makes me excited to start putting these ideas into practice.
I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much to explore.
Okay, I'm ready to dive back in and see what other gems we can uncover from Atomic Habits.
Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey exploring Atomic Habits and unpacking so many insightful ideas. From the power of tiny changes to the importance of systems and identity, it's clear that James Clear has really put together a practical framework for creating lasting change.
It really has been like an exploration of how our habits, our mindsets, and even our sense of self are all interconnected.
Yeah.
It's not just about changing what we do, but understanding the underlying why behind our actions.
Absolutely. As we wrap up this deep dive into Atomic Habits, what are some of the most impactful takeaways for our listeners, to start putting into practice today?
One of the biggest takeaways for me is that consistency is key.
Yeah.
Those tiny improvements might seem insignificant at first, but over time they have a compounding effect that can lead to remarkable results. It's like that 1% better each day principle we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It might not seem like much in the moment, but over a year it leads to significant progress. That's a great reminder that it's not about making huge sweeping changes overnight.
Right.
It's about those small, sustainable actions that we can stick with day after day. It's about building those systems, as Clear emphasizes.
Absolutely. Instead of getting fixated on a specific goal, shift your focus to building a system that supports that goal. If you want to write a book, don't just focus on finishing the book.
Yeah.
Focus on building a system for writing consistently, even if it's just for a short time each day.
And that ties in so well with the idea of identity. It's not just about doing the actions, but becoming the kind of person who does those actions.
Right.
If you see yourself as the writer, you're more likely to actually write.
Exactly. Your identity shapes your habits, so if you want to make lasting change, you need to start by changing your beliefs about yourself. If you believe you're capable of change, you're more likely to put in the effort required to make those changes stick.
That makes so much sense. We've also talked about Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. They seem like really actionable principles that anyone can apply to their own habits.
They are. And the beauty of them is that they can be applied to both good and bad habits. Want to start a new habit? Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Yeah.
Want to break a bad habit? Reverse the process. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
It's a simple but powerful framework.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed, it's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about making progress.
Yeah.
There will inevitably be times when we slip up or fall short.
Absolutely. We're all human. The key is to not get discouraged by those setbacks, but to get back on track as quickly as possible. Remember Clear's advice. Never miss twice.
Yes.
It's not about beating yourself up over a mistake, but about learning from it and moving forward. It's so important. Self-compassion is key in the process of change. We also talked about some other really helpful strategies for building better habits, like the Goldilocks rule. Finding that sweet spot of just manageable difficulty.
Right? If something's too easy, we get bored. If it's too hard, we get discouraged. The key is to find that level of challenge that keeps us engaged and motivated. It's about pushing ourselves just outside of our comfort zone without getting overwhelmed.
And we can't forget about reflection and review. Taking the time to analyze our habits, see what's working, and adjust our approach is crucial for continuous improvement.
It's like being a scientist running experiments on ourselves, gathering data, and refining our methods based on the results.
Yeah.
We also talked about the importance of maintaining a flexible sense of identity as we grow and change. It's about identifying those core values and beliefs that underpin our sense of self, rather than tying our identity to specific roles or achievements. That was such an important insight. It's about building an identity that can evolve with us as we navigate life's inevitable twists and turns. And of course, we can't leave out the power of habit stacking. It's such a clever strategy for building new habits by leveraging the momentum of existing ones.
Yeah. It makes building new habits so much easier because you're not starting from scratch. You're piggybacking on an existing behavior pattern, making the new habit more likely to stick.
I love that. As we close out this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of hope and possibility. It's clear that building better habits isn't about willpower or motivation. It's about understanding the science of behavior change
Yes.
and applying these simple but powerful principles to our lives.
And it's a journey we can all embark on. Regardless of our starting point or our past experiences, Atomic Habits provides a framework for anyone who wants to make positive changes in their lives.
It's been a pleasure diving into these ideas with you today and uncovering the wisdom within Atomic Habits. For our listeners, I encourage you to explore the book further and start experimenting with these principles in your own life. Remember, even the smallest changes, when done consistently, can lead to remarkable results. You have the power to shape your habits, and in turn, shape your destiny.